esteem. When we talk about narcissists, most people picture the obvious one, the loud one, the arrogant one, the person who dominates the room, talks over everyone, demands admiration, esteem, and doesn't even try to hide their grandiosity. And yes, that person exists. But I'm going to tell you something that may surprise you. That is not the narcissist who does the most damage, esteem. The most dangerous narcissist is the one you don't see coming. They don't look powerful. They don't sound grandiose. They don't announce themselves with swagger and entitlement. In fact, esteem. They often look like the opposite. They may seem shy, thoughtful, sensitive, wounded. They may talk about their difficult childhood, their betrayals, their anxiety, their struggles, esteem. And because you are a decent human being with empathy, you lean in, you listen, you care. And that's exactly how it begins. See, our brains are wired to look for obvious threats, esteem. If someone is aggressive, dismissive, or blatantly self-centered, we pick up on it quickly. We may not label it as narcissism, but we feel the friction, esteem. But when someone presents as vulnerable, misunderstood, or humble, our defenses lower. We assume sincerity. We project goodness onto them. The covert narcissist thrives in that projection, esteem. They may not brag openly, but they still believe they are superior. They may not demand admiration directly, but they quietly expect it. They may not insult you outright, esteem, but they will undermine you in subtle ways, a backhanded compliment here, a small correction there, a tone shift that makes you question yourself. And because it's subtle, esteem, you don't react to it the way you would to obvious cruelty. Instead, you rationalize it. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. They didn't mean it that way. They've just been hurt before, esteem. The most dangerous narcissists operate in ambiguity. They live in the gray zone where nothing is quite clear enough to call out, esteem. They may position themselves as the misunderstood one in every story, the friend who has always been betrayed, the employee who has never been appreciated, esteem, the partner who has only ever given and never received. And at first, it feels like depth, like emotional openness. But over time, you start to notice a pattern, esteem. Every conflict ends with them as the victim. Every disagreement becomes proof that the world mistreats them. And if you challenge that narrative gently, kindly, you will feel the shift. Esteem. The warmth cools, the tone changes, the guilt creeps in. The covert narcissist doesn't explode, they withdraw, they sulk. They become icy, esteem. They make you feel as though you've done something deeply wrong without ever clearly saying what it is. And now you are working to repair something you don't even understand, esteem. That's how the trap tightens. The narcissist you don't see coming often bonds with you through intensity. It feels like instant connection. They may say things like, esteem, I've never told anyone this before, very early on. Or, you're the only one who really understands me. And if you're an empathic person, that feels meaningful. It feels like trust, esteem. But what it really is fast-tracked intimacy. Healthy relationships build gradually. They allow space, they tolerate difference, esteem. The hidden narcissist accelerates closeness because closeness creates leverage. The more you know about them, the more invested you become. The more you care, esteem, the more willing you are to excuse. And here's another piece that makes them so hard to detect. They often perform humility, esteem. They may downplay their achievements while subtly fishing for reassurance. Oh, it was nothing. They'll say, waiting for you to insist it was everything, esteem. They may talk about how they don't need attention, while becoming visibly uncomfortable when someone else receives it. You might not be able to name it at first, but you'll feel it, esteem. A strange competition, a subtle comparison, a tension when the spotlight moves away from them. The narcissist you don't see coming doesn't need to be the loudest in the room, esteem. They just need to control the emotional temperature of it. And control is the key word here. Because underneath the sensitivity, underneath the vulnerability, esteem, underneath the soft-spoken exterior is the same core that exists in every narcissistic presentation, entitlement and lack of empathy. It just wears better camouflage, esteem. You'll notice it in moments that matter. When you're sick, suddenly they're sicker. When you succeed, their mood shifts. When you need support, the conversation circles back to them, esteem. It's not explosive, it's not dramatic, it's just consistently off-center, and slowly, almost invisibly, you begin to shrink. You hesitate before sharing good news, esteem. You over-explain your feelings. You start managing their reactions. This is where many people get confused. They'll say, but they're so sensitive. Yes, they are sensitive to slights, self-esteem, to ego threats, but they are often remarkably insensitive to your emotional reality. The narcissist you don't see coming is not always grandiose in the traditional sense, esteem. Sometimes they are chronically aggrieved. Sometimes they are intellectual and dismissive in a calm, measured way. Sometimes they present as spiritual, enlightened, self-aware, esteem. They may even use therapy language fluently. And that can be especially destabilizing, because when someone can articulate emotions well, We assume they feel them deeply and authentically. Esteem. But articulation is not the same as empathy. Insight into concepts is not the same as accountability. You may find yourself in circular conversations where you walk away feeling confused. Esteem. They never quite apologize. They justify, they contextualize. And somehow, the issue drifts away from their behavior and lands squarely on your misinterpretation. Esteem. And here's the most important piece: the narcissist you don't see coming often chooses conscientious people. People who self-reflect. People who consider their own flaws. Esteem. People who want to grow. Because if you are willing to examine yourself, you are easier to redirect. When they say, "You're overreacting," you don't immediately dismiss it. Esteem. You pause and wonder if you are. When they say, "You misunderstood me," you replay the conversation in your head looking for your mistake. That self-doubt becomes their shield. Over time, esteem. You may not even recognize the shift. You just feel more anxious, more careful, less certain of your instincts. And because they aren't screaming at you or overtly belittling you, esteem, you hesitate to label it as harm. But harm doesn't have to be loud to be real. The most dangerous narcissists understand social norms. They understand optics. They may be well-liked. Esteem. Thoughtful in public. Generous in visible ways. Which makes it even harder for you to reconcile the private experience. You think, if everyone else sees them as kind, maybe I'm the problem. Esteem. That isolation deepens the grip. And this is why awareness matters so much. Not so that you become suspicious of everyone. Not so that you label every imperfect person a narcissist, esteem, but so that you learn to pay attention to patterns rather than personas. Because personas can be crafted, esteem. The narcissist you don't see coming survives on the gap between how they appear and how you feel. If something consistently feels destabilizing, minimizing, or confusing, that matters. Esteem. Even if you can't immediately prove it, even if it doesn't fit the stereotype, you are not required to wait for dramatic evidence before honoring your discomfort. Esteem. As we move into the next parts of this conversation, the victim narcissist, the hero narcissist, the soft-spoken controller, understand that all of them fall under this umbrella. Esteem. They don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves slowly, in patterns that only become clear when you step back. The danger isn't just who they are, esteem. The danger is how long it takes to realize who they are. And by the time you do, you may already be questioning yourself more than you ever questioned them, esteem. So if you take nothing else from this, remember this: the most harmful narcissist is rarely the loudest one in the room, esteem. It's the one who quietly rearranges your reality while you're busy trying to be understanding. Trust the pattern, not the performance. Esteem. Let's go deeper into one of the most psychologically confusing dynamics you will ever experience: the narcissist who builds power through victimhood. Now remember, esteem. Earlier we talked about the narcissist you don't see coming, the one who doesn't fit the loud, grandiose stereotype. The victim narcissist lives squarely in that category. Esteem. They don't dominate through force. They don't intimidate. They don't command attention in obvious ways. They evoke sympathy. And sympathy is powerful. Esteem. This is the person whose life story feels like an endless string of injustices. Every workplace was toxic. Every friendship ended in betrayal. Every partner was abusive. Esteem. Every family member misunderstood them. At first, you listen and think, how has one person endured so much? Your heart opens. You want to be the safe place they never had. And that instinct, esteem, that compassion is exactly what the victim narcissist relies on. Because here's the difference between someone who has experienced hardship and someone who weaponizes it, esteem. One seeks healing and growth. The other seeks leverage. With the victim narcissist, pain becomes identity. It's not something they are working through. It's something they are building around. Esteem. They rehearse their stories. They refine them. They repeat them. And every retelling reinforces a single message: I am the one who has been wronged. In the beginning, esteem, you may feel honored that they trust you with these stories. They may say, I've never told anyone this before, or you're the only one who understands. That creates closeness quickly. Esteem. It creates a bond rooted in protection. But notice what happens when you gently challenge them. When you say, esteem, I wonder if there was miscommunication there? Or do you think you might have contributed in some small way? The shift is immediate. The room cools. Suddenly you are insensitive, esteem. You are minimizing their trauma. You are just like everyone else who failed them. What could have been a reflective conversation becomes a referendum on your loyalty. That's not vulnerability, esteem. That's control. The victim narcissist uses guilt the way other narcissists use intimidation. If you set a boundary, they look wounded. If you need space, they look abandoned, esteem. If you express frustration, they remind you of everything they've endured. And now the focus is no longer on the issue at hand, it's on repairing their hurt feelings. Over time, esteem, You start preemptively adjusting, you soften your tone, you cushion your feedback, you delay bringing up concerns because you know it will spiral into their pain. Esteem. You become hyper-aware of their emotional state. That hypervigilance is the cost of staying. Another hallmark of this dynamic is emotional competition. When you are struggling, esteem, somehow their struggle becomes bigger. When you are sick, they feel worse. When you are overwhelmed, their past trauma resurfaces. It's subtle but consistent. Esteem. The spotlight must return to them. And if you try to hold on to your moment, if you insist, I really need you right now, they may withdraw, or cry, or recount another story of betrayal. Esteem. The emotional gravity always pulls back toward their suffering. You begin to feel selfish for having needs. Let's pause there. Think about how powerful that is. Esteem. A relationship where your basic emotional needs start to feel like acts of cruelty. That doesn't happen through shouting, it happens through shame. Esteem. The victim narcissist also rewrites conflict in a very specific way. Healthy conflict involves two people taking responsibility. In this dynamic, conflict becomes proof of your failure. Esteem. If you say, "That hurt me," they may respond with, "I can't believe you think I would do that after everything I've been through." Now your pain becomes an accusation against their character. Esteem. So you back down. And here's where it gets even more complicated. The victim narcissist often genuinely believes their narrative. They are not always consciously plotting. Esteem. Their self-concept is so fused with being wrong that any threat to it feels existential. Accountability feels like annihilation. Esteem. But your compassion cannot cure someone's refusal to self-reflect. One of the most destabilizing elements of this dynamic is the oscillation between fragility and resentment. Esteem. They may appear delicate, easily hurt, easily overwhelmed. But underneath that fragility is entitlement, an expectation that you will prioritize them. Esteem. That you will protect them from discomfort. That you will regulate their emotions. If you fail to meet that expectation, the resentment emerges. It may not look explosive. Esteem. It may show up as coldness, sarcasm, withholding affection, subtle digs about how no one ever shows up. And now you are scrambling to prove that you are different. Esteem. The victim narcissist keeps an internal ledger. Every favor they've done for you, every time they listened, every sacrifice. And while they may say, "Esteem, I don't expect anything in return," the expectation is always there. The moment you assert independence or push back, the ledger opens. "After everything I've done for you." Esteem. That phrase is rarely spoken in healthy relationships as a weapon. Here it becomes one. Another important piece, they often isolate you without appearing to do so. Esteem. Because everyone else has wronged them, you may start distancing from those people too. You absorb their grievances, you adopt their narratives. Your world narrows. Esteem. Not because they demanded it, but because you wanted to protect them. Slowly, your emotional universe begins to revolve around maintaining their stability. And yet, despite all your effort, esteem, it never feels like enough. That's because the goal isn't healing. The goal is maintaining the identity of the wounded one. If they healed, if they integrated their experiences, esteem, if they took responsibility for their role and patterns, they would lose the central organizing principle of their relationships. Chronic victimhood protects the ego from shame. Esteem. If the world is always at fault, they never have to face their own limitations. This is where many empathetic, conscientious people get trapped. You believe in growth. Esteem. You believe people can change. You think, if I just support them long enough, they'll feel safe enough to look inward. But safety is not what's being sought. Control is. Esteem. When compassion becomes compliance, the relationship has already tilted. And I want to be very clear about something. Having empathy does not require you to tolerate manipulation. Esteem. You can care about someone's past without sacrificing your present. You can acknowledge their pain without surrendering your boundaries. Esteem. The moment you notice that your needs consistently shrink to accommodate their narrative, that is information. The moment you feel guilty for asking for reciprocity, that is information. Esteem. The moment every disagreement turns into proof that you are cruel, that is information. Trust that information, because here is the emotional toll of staying in this dynamic. Esteem. You begin to doubt your own goodness. You start to believe that asserting yourself makes you heartless. You become the caretaker of someone else's identity. And in doing so, esteem, you slowly abandon your own. The victim narcissist does not need to shout to control you. They only need you to fear being the next person who hurt them. And that fear keeps you quiet. Esteem. As we move forward and talk about the soft-spoken controller and the hero narcissist, understand that this theme runs through all of them. Esteem. It's not the volume of the behavior that makes it dangerous. It's the subtle erosion of your self-trust. In the case of the victim narcissist, the erosion happens through guilt, esteem, through obligation, through the constant pressure to prove that you are not like the others, esteem. But a healthy relationship does not require you to audition for the role of least disappointing human. If someone's identity depends on being perpetually wronged, esteem, there will never be space for mutual accountability. There will only be room for you to either comply or be recast as the villain in their next story, esteem. And you deserve a relationship where compassion connects you, not one where it cages you. Empathy should be shared, not exploited, esteem. Let's take this further and really sit with the soft-spoken controller, because this is one of the most psychologically destabilizing dynamics you will ever encounter, esteem. Precisely because it doesn't look like abuse. This person doesn't yell, they don't slam doors, they don't call you names. In fact, if someone were observing from the outside, esteem, they might describe them as calm, thoughtful, emotionally intelligent. They may even be the person others go to for advice. And that's what makes this so confusing, esteem. The soft-spoken controller builds their power through subtle positioning. They position themselves as the reasonable one, the rational one, the grounded one. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, esteem, you become the emotional one, the reactive one, the one who misunderstood. In the beginning, it feels wonderful. They listen intently. They validate your feelings. Esteem, they seem curious about your inner world. They may even use language that sounds therapeutic. I want to hold space for you. Let's process that. I really value communication. You think, esteem, finally, someone mature. But watch carefully what happens when communication turns toward their behavior. If you bring up something that hurt you, they don't explode. They lean back, esteem. They become analytical. They dissect your wording. They question your interpretation. Are you sure that's what happened? I think you might be projecting. That's not how I remember it, esteem. Now you're in a debate about reality. This is where confusion begins to replace clarity. You came into the conversation with a simple feeling, esteem. That hurt me. You leave wondering whether your perception is flawed, whether you overreacted, whether you're being unfair. And because they remain calm, you assume they must be right, esteem. Calm is powerful. It creates contrast. If you show emotion and they do not, it subtly frames you as unstable and them as composed, esteem. But emotional suppression is not the same as emotional health. Sometimes it's simply control. The soft-spoken controller often uses intellectualization as a shield, esteem. Instead of addressing the emotional impact of their behavior, they turn it into a conceptual discussion. They analyze dynamics. They cite psychology. They explain attachment styles, esteem. They talk about triggers, all of which sounds insightful. But insight without accountability is manipulation dressed up as maturity, esteem. Another common tactic is what I call the slow withdrawal. They don't threaten. They don't punish overtly. They simply reduce warmth. Communication becomes shorter. Eye contact decreases. Esteem, physical affection lessens. When you ask if something is wrong, they say, I'm fine. Just thinking. And now you're scanning the past 24 hours trying to find your mistake, esteem. That subtle withholding becomes a conditioning mechanism. You start adjusting your behavior to avoid triggering distance. You soften disagreements. You preemptively reassure, esteem. You become careful over time. You are no longer showing up authentically. You are showing up strategically. This is where people often say, but they're so nice. And yes, esteem, they can be incredibly nice when things are going their way, when you are aligned, when you are affirming, when you are not challenging their authority in the relationship, esteem, but when you assert independence, when you succeed in a way that shifts attention, when you call out inconsistency. That's when the passive aggression emerges. It might sound like a joke at your expense, a subtle dig about your competence, a comparison to someone else who is more stable, or less sensitive, delivered lightly. With a smile, esteem. And if you react, they may say, I was just kidding. Now you look humorless. This is how the hierarchy is built. Not through domination, but through implication, esteem. They imply that they are more evolved, more regulated, more thoughtful. And if you struggle, it becomes evidence that you have work to do, esteem. The soft-spoken controller is deeply uncomfortable with being seen as flawed. But instead of defending aggressively, they defend subtly, they reframe, they redirect, esteem. They reinterpret events in ways that protect their self-image. You may notice that apologies are carefully constructed, esteem. I'm sorry you felt that way. I didn't realize you'd take it like that. That wasn't my intention. Notice what's missing: ownership. There is acknowledgement of your feeling, esteem, but not responsibility for the behavior. And if you push further, I need you to understand that what you did was hurtful. The conversation may turn toward your expectations being too high, esteem. Gradually, you internalize the idea that your needs are excessive. Another layer of this dynamic is moral positioning. The soft-spoken controller often frames themselves as principled, fair, esteem, deeply committed to growth. They may talk about integrity, honesty, emotional safety. And because those are good values, you trust them. But values can be weaponized. If you become upset, esteem, they may say, I thought we were trying to create a peaceful dynamic. If you raise your voice after repeated invalidation, they may point to your tone as the problem, esteem. Now the focus shifts from the pattern of their behavior to the single moment of your frustration. This creates what I call the spotlight shift. The larger issue disappears, esteem, and your reaction becomes the headline. Over time, this erodes your confidence in your own emotional compass. You start questioning not just what happened, esteem, but how you feel about what happened. You rehearse conversations in your head before bringing them up. You anticipate counterarguments. And here's the quiet tragedy, esteem. You may become more articulate, more self-reflective, more emotionally aware, but not because you are thriving, because you are defending, esteem. The soft-spoken controller also tends to curate their public persona carefully. In social settings, they are attentive, warm, supportive. Others may describe them as balanced and kind, esteem, which means when you try to explain the private confusion, you hesitate. How can someone so calm make me feel so unstable? But remember this, esteem. Emotional destabilization does not require volume, it requires consistency. If you consistently leave interactions feeling small, unsure, or subtly inferior, that is not an accident, esteem. And I want to emphasize something important. Many people who use these tactics are not consciously plotting every move. Some learned early in life that overt aggression led to rejection, esteem, so they adapted. They became controlled instead of explosive. They became strategic instead of loud. But adaptation does not excuse harm, esteem. The core feature is the same as in every narcissistic presentation: a fragile ego that cannot tolerate true equality. There must be an upper hand, esteem. And if they cannot assert it through dominance, they assert it through subtle superiority. What makes this type especially dangerous is that they often select thoughtful, esteem, introspective partners and friends, people who value growth, people who are willing to examine themselves. Because if you are open to feedback, you are easier to redirect. When they say, esteem, I think you might be misreading that, you don't dismiss it outright. You consider it, you analyze yourself, you try to improve. And in doing so, esteem, you slowly hand over authority over your own perception. This is why awareness is so critical, not to become defensive or cynical, but to notice patterns. Esteem, healthy relationships allow for disagreement without destabilization. They allow for accountability without humiliation. They allow for emotional expression without hierarchy. Esteem. If someone's calm consistently leaves you confused rather than clear, that matters. If their intelligence consistently makes you feel inferior rather than empowered, that matters, esteem. If their niceness disappears when you assert yourself, that matters. The goal is not to win debates in these relationships. The goal is to observe the pattern, esteem. Because once you see the pattern, the spell breaks. The soft-spoken controller relies on your doubt. They rely on your willingness to question yourself more than you question them, esteem. They rely on your discomfort with conflict. But healthy connection does not require you to shrink your voice to preserve someone else's image, esteem. You are allowed to have feelings that do not need to be cross-examined. You are allowed to assert needs that do not require philosophical justification, esteem. And you are allowed to walk away from calm that feels like control. Soft words can still carry manipulation. Quiet dominance is still dominance, esteem. And if someone's composure consistently costs you your confidence, that calm is not safety, it's strategy. Now let's really unpack the hero narcissist, esteem, because this one can feel the most confusing of all. The victim narcissist pulls you in through sympathy. The soft-spoken controller destabilizes you through calm superiority, esteem. But the hero narcissist, they sweep in like salvation. They arrive at a moment when you are overwhelmed, uncertain, hurt, or transitioning. And they don't just offer support, they take charge, esteem. They solve problems quickly. They make calls. They organize. They defend you. They may even confront people on your behalf. In the beginning, esteem, it feels powerful to be aligned with someone so decisive. You feel chosen, protected, elevated. And here's the emotional hook: relief. Relief is intoxicating when you've been struggling, esteem. If you've just left a difficult relationship, started a new job, moved to a new city, or faced a personal crisis, someone stepping in confidently can feel like stability, esteem. The hero narcissist senses that vulnerability, not necessarily in a predatory way at first, but instinctively. They position themselves as indispensable, esteem. Listen carefully to the language they use. Don't worry, I've got this. You shouldn't have to deal with that. Let me handle it. On the surface, it sounds caring, and sometimes it is, esteem, in healthy people. But with the hero narcissist, there is a subtle undercurrent: you need me. And dependency is the currency. At first, you may not notice anything uncomfortable. In fact, esteem, you might feel grateful. They helped you negotiate something. They gave you advice that worked. They introduced you to people. They made you feel safe. But gradually, esteem, the dynamic shifts from support to authority. You start checking in with them before making decisions. Not because they demanded it, but because it feels easier. They have strong opinions. Esteem. They seem confident, and when you disagree, you may notice something subtle. A pause, a tightening of their expression, a slight withdrawal of warmth. They don't yell. They don't forbid. Esteem. But the emotional climate changes. And because they've done so much for you, disagreeing feels uncomfortable. It feels almost ungrateful. That's how the leverage builds. Esteem. The hero narcissist keeps an internal record of their contributions, every favor, every sacrifice, every time they showed up, and they may not mention it immediately. In fact, they may insist. Esteem. I don't expect anything in return. But the expectation is there. The moment you assert independence in a way that threatens their central role, the ledger opens. Esteem. After everything I've done for you, I was there when no one else was. I put so much into this. Generosity becomes transactional. Esteem. One of the clearest signs of this dynamic is how they respond to your growth. In healthy relationships, your increasing strength is celebrated. Your autonomy is encouraged. Esteem. Your confidence is attractive. With the hero narcissist, your growth can feel destabilizing to them. If you start solving your own problems, their involvement may decrease. Esteem. Not because you asked for space, but because they feel less essential. You might notice subtle criticism creeping in. Esteem. Are you sure that's the best approach? I just don't want you to make a mistake. You've changed. The message underneath is, I preferred you when you needed me more. Esteem. The hero narcissist doesn't want a partner or friend, they want a dependent. And here's where it gets complicated. They often truly believe they are helping. Esteem. They may genuinely feel protective. But the protection is intertwined with ego. Being needed reinforces their identity. It confirms their superiority. It gives them purpose. Esteem. Without someone to rescue, who are they? Another important layer is how they handle your boundaries. If you say, I appreciate your help, esteem, but I want to try this on my own, a healthy person might say, of course. I'm here if you need me. The hero narcissist may smile and agree, but the emotional distance begins. Esteem. You may sense disappointment, or subtle disapproval, or a shift in enthusiasm, because your independence reduces their spotlight. And let's talk about that spotlight. Esteem. The hero narcissist often thrives publicly. They like being seen as generous, strong, reliable. They may tell stories about how they stepped in for you. Esteem. They may highlight their role in your success. Even if they don't exaggerate outright, there's an emphasis. Over time, esteem. You may feel like a supporting character in a story where they are the main figure. And if you push back, if you assert that your accomplishments are yours, they may react defensively. Esteem. They might accuse you of minimizing their contribution or of being ungrateful. Guilt re-enters the room. Notice the pattern here. Esteem. Whether it's the victim narcissist using guilt through suffering or the hero narcissist using guilt through sacrifice, the mechanism is similar. Your autonomy becomes framed as betrayal. Esteem. The hero narcissist may also subtly undermine your competence while appearing supportive. You're amazing, but you're not great with confrontation. Let me handle it. You're so talented. Esteem, but you can be narv, I'll protect you. Compliment wrapped around diminishment. Over time, that narrative seeps in. You may start to believe you are less capable without them. Esteem. You may hesitate before acting alone. You may seek their approval reflexively. That's not empowerment, that's conditioning. And here's something crucial. Esteem. The hero narcissist often enters relationships very intensely. They show up big, big promises, big protection. Big loyalty. The intensity creates bonding. You feel chosen. Esteem. You feel prioritized. But intensity is not the same as stability. Once the initial crisis fades, once the dramatic need for rescue diminishes, esteem, they may unconsciously create new situations where they can step back into the role. Conflicts may escalate. Problems may be magnified because chaos creates opportunity for heroism. Esteem. Healthy love is steady. It doesn't require constant emergencies. The hero narcissist also struggles with true equality. If you challenge them intellectually, emotionally, professionally, esteem, you may notice subtle competition. They may compare achievements. They may shift conversations toward their own accomplishments. They may offer advice even when it's not requested. Esteem. Advice becomes assertion of authority. And because they are often charismatic and capable, others may admire them, which makes it even harder for you to articulate your discomfort. Esteem. From the outside, they look generous, strong, reliable. But generosity that demands loyalty is not generosity, it's investment. Esteem. Another subtle sign is how they respond when you turn to someone else for help. If you seek advice from a friend, mentor, or family member instead of them, there may be tension. Esteem. They might say, "Why didn't you come to me?" It may sound hurt, but underneath is territoriality. Your reliance is part of their identity. As we look across these patterns, the victim, esteem, the soft-spoken controller, the hero, what ties them together is the inability to tolerate mutuality. True mutuality requires flexibility. It requires shared power, esteem. It requires accepting that you are not always central. The hero narcissist cannot comfortably share that space. And here's the part I really want you to hear: support should expand you. Esteem. It should make you more confident, more autonomous, more capable of navigating the world on your own. If someone's help consistently leaves you feeling smaller, more hesitant, more obligated, esteem. Something is off. You are allowed to appreciate someone's contribution without surrendering your independence. You are allowed to say thank you without signing a lifelong contract. Esteem. You are allowed to grow beyond the version of yourself they first met. If their kindness comes with invisible strings, those strings will eventually tighten. Esteem. The hero narcissist doesn't need to dominate loudly. They simply need you to believe that you cannot thrive without them. But you can. And the moment you reclaim your own agency, esteem, you will see clearly whether their love was about your strength or about their spotlight. Real support sets you free. Anything else is a stage. Now let's step back and ask a bigger question. Esteem. Why are these types, the victim narcissist, the soft-spoken controller, the hero narcissist, often more dangerous than the overt, grandiose narcissist everyone warns you about? Esteem. Because at least with the overt narcissist, eventually the mask slips loudly. They brag, they belittle, they demand admiration, they interrupt, they make their entitlement obvious. Esteem. You may not label it narcissism immediately, but you feel the friction quickly. Something in your nervous system goes, this is too much. And even if you stay for a while, esteem, there is less ambiguity about what is happening. With these quieter presentations, ambiguity is the weapon. They don't look toxic, they look wounded, they look thoughtful, they look generous. Esteem, they look calm. And because they look good, your brain struggles to reconcile the discomfort you feel. That internal conflict is exhausting. You think, if they're so kind, esteem, why do I feel so small? If they're so thoughtful, why do I feel so confused? If they're so supportive, why do I feel so dependent? The danger isn't just their behavior, esteem. The danger is the cognitive dissonance they create. When someone is overtly cruel, your mind and body align. You feel hurt and the cause is clear, esteem. But when someone is subtly undermining you while appearing compassionate, your internal signals get scrambled. You start questioning yourself instead of the dynamic, esteem, and that self-doubt is fertile ground. The overt narcissist often pushes people away quickly. The hidden types pull people in deeply before the erosion begins. They bond through vulnerability, esteem, intellect, shared values, or intense support. By the time you notice the pattern, you are invested, you've shared secrets, you've built routines, you've integrated them into your world, esteem. Leaving doesn't just mean ending a relationship. It means dismantling a story you believed about who they were. That's part of the danger, esteem. Another reason these types are more destabilizing is because they exploit your strengths. The overt narcissist may prey on admiration. These types prey on empathy, introspection, loyalty, esteem, and gratitude. If you are a self-reflective person, you are more likely to ask, what can I do better? When the soft-spoken controller reframes a conflict as your misunderstanding, esteem, you consider it. When the victim narcissist cries about being hurt again, you soften. When the hero narcissist reminds you of everything they've done, you feel thankful. Esteem, your goodness becomes the entry point. And because these dynamics unfold slowly, you adapt gradually. You don't wake up one day in chaos, esteem. You wake up one day slightly more cautious than you used to be, slightly more apologetic, slightly more careful. It's incremental, esteem. You stop sharing certain opinions because debates feel exhausting. You downplay achievements because it shifts the energy. You avoid topics that lead to withdrawal or guilt, esteem. You start scanning their moods before speaking. None of this feels dramatic in the moment, but over time it reshapes you. The overt narcissist might shatter your confidence quickly, esteem. The hidden narcissist erodes it quietly. There's also a social dimension. Because these individuals often appear kind, thoughtful, or generous in public, esteem. You may not receive validation if you speak up. Others may say, that doesn't sound like them, or they've always been so supportive. And now you feel alone with your experience, esteem. Isolation deepens the confusion. You may begin to think, maybe I'm too sensitive, maybe I expect too much, maybe I'm the problem. That internalization is the real damage, esteem. One of the most important psychological concepts here is gaslighting, not always in the dramatic, overt sense, but in subtle ways. When your perception is consistently questioned, esteem. When your memory is reframed, when your emotional reactions are labeled as exaggerated. With overt narcissism, the gaslighting can be obvious. With these hidden types, it's nuanced, esteem. I think you're reading into that. That's not what I meant. You're focusing on the negative. Individually, these phrases don't seem abusive. Collectively, over time, esteem. They destabilize your trust in yourself. And when you no longer trust your perception, you become easier to manage, esteem. Another reason these types are more dangerous is because they can remain in your life longer. Overt narcissists often burn bridges. Their grandiosity creates conflict. Esteem. But the victim narcissist gains sympathy. The soft-spoken controller gains respect. The hero narcissist gains admiration. They can build social capital. Esteem. Which means when you start pulling away, they may still have allies. And you may hesitate to disrupt the image others have of them. This prolongs the dynamic. Esteem. The longer a narcissistic pattern continues, the more entrenched the power imbalance becomes. You may not even recognize how much you've adjusted. Esteem. You may look back years later and realize you slowly abandoned parts of yourself. That's the quiet devastation. And let's talk about the nervous system for a moment. Esteem. Chronic ambiguity is stressful. When you're never quite sure where you stand, when warmth can turn to coolness, when praise can turn to subtle criticism, when help can turn to obligation, esteem, your body stays on alert. You may feel anxious without clear reason. You may overthink interactions. You may replay conversations at night. That hypervigilance becomes normalized. Esteem. The overt narcissist's volatility is loud and sharp. The hidden narcissist's volatility is subtle and unpredictable. And unpredictability is deeply dysregulating. Esteem. You never quite know which version you're going to get. Now here's the most painful part, because these types don't fit the stereotype. It often takes longer to leave. Esteem. You don't have dramatic stories of screaming matches or public humiliation. You have confusion. You have subtle wounds. You have patterns that are hard to explain in a single sentence. Esteem. You may even miss them when you create distance, because they weren't always cruel. They were often kind, supportive, insightful, engaging. And that mix is what makes it so sticky. Esteem. The overt narcissist can feel like a storm. The hidden narcissist feels like a slow tide pulling you out before you realize how far you've drifted. But here's the empowering truth. Esteem. Once you understand this pattern, the fog begins to lift. You start paying attention to how you feel consistently, not just to how they appear occasionally. You notice the emotional cost. Esteem. You stop dismissing your discomfort simply because it doesn't look dramatic. You begin to understand that harm is not defined by volume, it's defined by impact. Esteem. And impact shows up in your body. In your shrinking, in your hesitation, in your second-guessing. The more covert the dynamic. Esteem. The more important it becomes to trust patterns over performances. A single kind act does not erase a consistent pattern of invalidation. A single apology does not undo chronic blame shifting. Esteem. A single grand gesture does not cancel ongoing control. Consistency is the metric. And here is the final piece that makes these types more dangerous. Esteem. They can convince you that you are growing while you are actually shrinking. The soft-spoken controller frames your self-doubt as introspection. Esteem. The victim narcissist frames your guilt as compassion. The hero narcissist frames your dependency as loyalty. It can feel like maturity, empathy, gratitude. Esteem. But maturity does not require self-erasure. Empathy does not require self-abandonment. Gratitude does not require obedience. If your emotional world becomes narrower over time, esteem. That is not growth. When you look at all of this together, the pattern becomes clear. The overt narcissist overwhelms you. The hidden narcissist infiltrates you. And infiltration is quieter. Esteem. But often deeper. So if you find yourself saying, but they're not that bad, pause. If you find yourself constantly justifying small hurts because there's no big explosion, pause. Esteem. If you find yourself more focused on protecting their image than protecting your well-being, pause. Because the most dangerous dynamics are not always the loudest ones. Esteem. They are the ones that quietly teach you not to trust yourself. And the moment you begin trusting your patterns, your instincts, your lived experience, esteem, that's the moment their power starts to unravel. The loud narcissist bruises you. The hidden narcissist rewrites you. And once you see the rewrite happening, esteem, you can finally take the pen back. Let's take a step back and look at the last, and perhaps most insidious, type of narcissist you might encounter, the charming manipulator. Esteem. This is the person who doesn't just quietly control or evoke guilt or position themselves as a rescuer. No, esteem. This one operates under a veneer of charisma so seamless that it can make even the most discerning person second-guess their instincts. At first glance, they seem magnetic, likable, esteem, perhaps even inspiring. People are drawn to them. They enter rooms and instantly command attention not through force or volume, but through presence. They smile, they engage, they listen, esteem, and they remember details about you that make you feel truly seen. It's intoxicating. The danger here is subtlety. This isn't someone who shouts to assert dominance or cries to evoke guilt, esteem, or performs heroic deeds to secure dependency. Instead, their weapon is charm. Their power lies in their ability to make you feel like they understand you better than anyone else ever could. Esteem. You think, finally, someone who gets me, and that sense of understanding creates a psychological opening. It makes you vulnerable without you even realizing it. Esteem. The charming manipulator is a master of first impressions, and they often front-load positivity. They flatter you, notice your strengths, validate your ambitions. Esteem. They align themselves with your values, your sense of humor, your worldview. You feel an immediate connection. But this connection, as strong as it feels, is engineered. Every compliment, esteem. Every nod, every laugh is calculated to build trust, to establish rapport, to make you reliant on the emotional feedback they provide. Once that initial trust is established, esteem, the subtlety of their control begins to emerge. They rarely escalate conflicts openly. Instead, they employ strategies of influence and persuasion that feel reasonable, almost logical. Esteem. They might question your judgment gently, couching it in concern. Esteem. Are you sure that's the best approach? I just worry about the consequences if you take this path. Or they may highlight minor flaws. Esteem, presenting them as helpful observations rather than critiques. And because they are so socially skilled, these interventions feel like guidance rather than manipulation. Esteem. But the effect is the same. They shape your perception, steer your decisions, and gradually reposition themselves as the authority in your life. And here's the tricky part, esteem, you don't see it happening. Their influence is incremental. At first, it seems like advice. Later, it becomes expectation. Esteem. You find yourself second, guessing choices you would have made confidently before, wondering if you're disappointing them or missing their approval. Esteem, the charming manipulator, also excels at mirroring. They reflect back your desires, your fears, your dreams in a way that feels affirming, validating, almost miraculous. You think, finally, esteem, someone is attuned to me. But mirroring isn't connection, it's a strategy. It creates a sense of intimacy that feels deep, but is largely one-sided. Esteem. You are emotionally investing in someone who is continuously observing, calculating, and adapting to your responses to maintain control. Over time, the charming manipulator uses these small, esteem, calculated adjustments to manage how you feel and how you behave. They can withdraw attention subtly, induce self-doubt without accusation, or use praise strategically to reinforce compliance. Esteem. And because their control is masked by warmth, humor, or apparent insight, it often goes unrecognized by both you and others around you. Esteem. One hallmark of this type is their ability to maintain a positive public image while quietly undermining you privately. To friends, family, and colleagues, they appear generous, wise, esteem, and socially adept. Meanwhile, in private, you may notice inconsistencies, a backhanded compliment here, a dismissive remark there. Esteem. A subtle reframing of events that leaves you questioning your memory or judgment. This contrast creates cognitive dissonance. You trust what you see publicly, while internally, esteem, you feel uneasy. The unease is a signal, the internal alarm of subtle manipulation, but it is often rationalized or dismissed because of the outward charm. Esteem. This type of narcissist is also skilled at creating dependency without overt coercion. Unlike the hero narcissist, who inserts themselves directly into your life under the guise of rescue. Esteem. The charming manipulator positions themselves as a partner in your journey. They celebrate your successes, appear supportive of your ambitions, and gently guide your choices. But every nudge, esteem, every suggestion, every strategic compliment strengthens their influence and subtly diminishes your autonomy. Over time, you find your confidence intertwined with their approval, esteem, and decisions that once felt instinctive now require silent negotiation with them in your mind. Another critical feature of the charming manipulator is their skill at exploiting empathy. Esteem. They can craft narratives that evoke your compassion and loyalty, making it difficult to hold firm boundaries. When they do something manipulative, they often frame it as concern or foresight. Esteem. When you question their behavior, they appeal to shared values or past kindnesses. You may think, surely they meant well. Esteem. They must have had my best interests at heart. And because their initial bond felt genuine, you are predisposed to give them the benefit of the doubt repeatedly. Esteem. The charming manipulator also understands timing. They often operate strategically around moments of vulnerability. When you are stressed, insecure, or uncertain, they are attentive, esteem, flattering, and seemingly supportive. When you are confident and independent, they may retreat slightly or introduce subtle criticism, esteem, creating an invisible pull that keeps you seeking their presence and approval. It's a dynamic of push and pull designed to maintain their influence without overt confrontation, esteem. And because they are so adept at social perception, they can simultaneously maintain admiration from others while keeping you off balance, esteem. You may hesitate to share your experience because they are well regarded socially, leaving you feeling isolated and uncertain about the validity of your feelings, esteem. This social camouflage increases their power, making it harder to recognize or confront the dynamic. The cumulative effect of this type of narcissist is insidious. Esteem. Your self-trust erodes gradually. Your boundaries shrink, often without your conscious awareness. You may feel like you are walking on eggshells. Esteem. Second, guessing choices that once felt straightforward. Your emotional energy becomes entangled with maintaining the relationship, monitoring responses, and seeking approval, esteem, all while trying to reconcile the charming persona you see publicly with the subtle undermining you experience privately. But here's the important truth, esteem. No one's charm should cost you your autonomy, your clarity, or your confidence. True connection doesn't require subtle manipulation, even in the guise of support, intellect, or charisma, esteem. Real partnership, respect, and empathy create space for independence, validation for your perspective, and freedom to grow without covert influence. The charm is not the danger, it's the mask, esteem. The danger is the control hidden beneath it, and once you recognize it, the power shifts. Once you see the patterns, trust your experience, and reclaim your agency, charm loses its grip, esteem. Because you no longer measure your worth by their approval or navigate your life through their subtle steering. The most insidious manipulators are not the loud, brash ones, esteem. They are the ones who make you feel seen, appreciated, and understood while quietly shaping the person you become. The moment you recognize that, you reclaim not just your choices, trust. And self-trust, once regained, is unshakable.